Welcome back, everyone. That was a great session on privilege. Now, this is the first today of our law enforcement spotlights, where sometimes we take very specific law enforcement officials, we put them in the spotlight for 25 minutes. Hopefully, you'll have some good questions. Leading this first spotlight is the Tom Brady of incident response. He is Jason Smolanoff, Senior Managing Director and Global Cyber Risk Practice Leader at Kroll, who continues to lead Kroll following the footsteps of the legendary David Fontaine to astronomical growth and success. In fact, in this year, Jason has led Kroll acquisitions of 3 different cybersecurity companies, including RedScan just recently. I believe that's public. And he's just building this incredible cyber empire. And it's so fun to watch from the incident response forum perspective, because what started out as a much smaller entity is now just clearly taking over the world. What makes Jason a cyber expert is not just his FBI experience, where he led a broad range of cyber investigations and also served in Afghanistan in the FBI's Major Crime Task Force. Or his ability to serve as an expert witness in just about any kind of cyber investigation. We worked together at Strauss Friedberg. But unlike any other IR expert here today, or perhaps on the planet, Jason is also a rocket scientist, like a real rocket scientist who has actually earned 2 patents. He has a master's in chemical physics, which he used to help manufacture cutting-edge computer chip technology for clients such as IBM, Intel, Motorola, Sony, and much more. I could talk for hours about his credentials. Welcome, my good friend, Jason Smolanoff.
Hey, thanks so much, John. I'm really, really happy to be here, and thanks for the very humbling and kind introduction. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I think it's going to be fun for you because you're interviewing Jonathan Holmes, who, when he's joined the FBI, actually worked for you. You were his first supervisor there. And Jonathan Holmes is very special. He's assigned to the FBI Cyber Division's Major Crimes Unit, the MCCU, where he assists ransomware case teams, develops the FBI strategy to combat data breaches, cyber attacks. Prior to his assignment in MCCU, SSA Holmes, Supervisory Special Agent Holmes, investigated criminal and national security cyber investigations during his tenure in both the FBI's Milwaukee and Los Angeles divisions. He also served as an acting assistant legal attaché, a legat, in Sofia, Bulgaria, and Albania and Macedonia in 2015 and 2016. Like Jason, SSA Holmes is a bona fide technologist with a degree in computer engineering, and he also happens to be an Air Force veteran. Welcome, Jonathan, and we have to thank you very much for helping keep us safe. We know you could work anywhere you wanted in the world, and we're so happy you're working at the FBI. So take it away, Jason, and enjoy the spotlight.
That's great. Thanks, John. And Jonathan, thank you so much for being here. It's really good to see you, and it's really wonderful to have the opportunity to speak with you again publicly while you're still in the FBI and after I left. So thank you for joining.
Happy to be here, Jason.
So I wanted to, the FBI has really been in the paper quite a bit these days with respect to ransomware and different types of botnets and different types of malware takedowns. And I thought it might be good to set the stage with what is the FBI's priorities with respect to cyber? And can you describe that a little bit for us?
Sure. So for cyber, and when I say cyber in this context, since I'm in the major cyber crimes unit, I'm really referring more to our criminal cyber program, right? So in general, the FBI, when we're talking about cyber investigations, we have one part of the FBI that's focused on criminal cyber investigations. That's again, like you mentioned, malware, ransomware, business email compromise cases, that type of thing. We also have another section of the FBI Cyber Division that's dealing more with nation state actors. So those are actors that are accessing computer systems that are sponsored by foreign governments to steal sensitive or classified information. My role is within the major cyber crimes unit, which is responsible for the criminal side of things. So as I mentioned, the ransomware actors, the business email compromise actors, the bulletproof hosting actors, those types of things. I would say in general, on the criminal side of things, probably the top threats that we're seeing is continuing to see numerous business email compromise victims, as well as ransomware being a top threat. Over the last year, and a half, I would say, ransomware has really taken off, and the very sophisticated cyber criminals have really gravitated from other things over to ransomware just because it's so lucrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, we're obviously seeing that all over the place. It's really becoming a pretty significant issue, or has been a significant issue for some time. So when I was in the FBI, I remember that one of the major goals was to try and disrupt or dismantle large criminal or terrorist organizations. Is that still a goal of the FBI, or is that still on the forefront of what you're looking to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll stick with the ransomware vein here, right? Is when we talk about our ransomware strategy, we have like three main lines of effort. And the first line of effort is to hold these bad guys accountable. And we do that by doing what the FBI does best: identify who these people are and arrest them when we can. We do other things like seize their money. So if we know where there's money's at, we try and take it. When appropriate, we leverage sanctions, and we try and shut down their infrastructure. And to speak to that larger effort to disrupt the entire organization, we try and do all of those things simultaneously when we can. So if we can arrest somebody and take their infrastructure offline at the same time and seize their money, we see that as being a much better effect than sort of doing each of these actions willy-nilly. So when we're going after those organizations, that's what we're doing on the holding actors accountable side. But then we're not just going after the actors that are behind, let's say, each ransomware variant. We're also targeting the ecosystem that enables those individuals. And when I say target the ecosystem, again, with respect to ransomware, I would say we're targeting things like marketplace sites. So if we know ransomware actors are going to marketplace sites to purchase credentials that they can then leverage to deploy ransomware, we're doing our best to shut those sites down. If we know the ransomware actors are laundering money through unregulated virtual currency exchanges, we might be targeting those exchanges and shutting those exchanges down. Or we also target other groups. So again, in the ransomware example, there's some malware that facilitates ransomware. Examples would be like Dridex or Tritbot or Emote, right? These are malware that supports ransomware actors. And so we have cases on each of those malware sets, and we try and disrupt those organizations and take those organizations out of commission as well.
So this sounds like a real coordinated effort, but I mean, my understanding from doing a lot of these investigations on for the private sector on the consulting side is that they're international. So I mean, I'm probably stating the obvious, but I imagine law enforcement partnership is critical to this. Particularly, I know just recently the Emote takedown happened. Could you? That seems like it might be a good example. Like, can you maybe describe how the FBI works with foreign law enforcement and public and private sector folks to really affect that takedown, and maybe describe for everyone what that really means?
Sure, absolutely. So again, as I described, right, we're trying to do all of these things and take action simultaneously against these actors. And when we're enacting that strategy, for all of these large cases, we are doing that in concert with our foreign law enforcement partners, as well as often other federal law enforcement partners and federal government partners. So it's like a real team sport here, right? We're getting everybody involved. More specifically on the international side, the FBI has legal attaché offices located all over the world. I think you guys mentioned earlier, I served in a legal attaché office for a short period of time. The idea there is that we have FBI agents located all over the world to facilitate these joint investigations with other countries. And again, you brought up Emotet as a great example, right? So in the Emotet example, the case teams from the FBI were working with their law enforcement partners, international law enforcement partners, to identify the actors behind the organization and the infrastructure used by the organization. And that partnership, again, wasn't just between the FBI case team and international law enforcement partners, right? Because infrastructure is all over the world and the bad actors are all over the world. but they were also doing that in concert with private industry. So they were talking regularly with private industry, because private industry has valuable information that they can provide to the case teams, again, on actors and infrastructure. And so all of that intelligence feeds together. And in this case, in the Emote example, that coordinated effort between international law enforcement and private industry culminated with an action taken that disrupted the infrastructure used by these Emote actors. And so that's a great example of us all working together for a larger effort.
So can we dig into that just a little bit? Like, can you describe for the audience, like how long does an investigation like that take? Right? Because I think most of us watch TV, and an investigation gets done on Law and Order in about 43 minutes without commercials, right? So can you provide a little context behind like what goes into that kind of an effort?
Sure. So yeah, again, I think that investigation was at least probably, I want to say at least a couple of years running. Again, it involves, the FBI opening a case after they identify a victim. So in this case, the Emote team, FBI opens an investigation after there's a victim, and then we begin to see more and more victims. And sometimes with these new cases, it takes a little bit of time before this larger effort gets underway, because we might not realize right away that this is a huge problem. So as the case team, from the FBI's perspective, is investigating, and we begin to see more and more victims, and we see interest from private industry, we'll immediately start engaging with private industry to share information. Similarly, as our foreign partners identify that they might be being victimized, or if we identify actors or infrastructure overseas, we immediately start reaching out to those partners. And that engagement happens essentially in real time. It takes a little bit to get going because everyone's sort of focused on so many things at any given point in time. But at least with the Emote investigation being a good example, over time, there's regular meetings, regular conference calls, not only between private sector, but our European counterparts at Europol, again, coming up with the larger strategy for the case, right? So they're making calculated decisions on what they know and how to best, let's say, disrupt infrastructure and who best to arrest. And so again, going back to that team effort, right? Those decisions are not just made by the FBI, those decisions are made really in concert with all the stakeholders to make sure that we have the best outcome.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, and there was a comment in the chat here just said, with so little, why is there so little information being made public on enforcement successes? And I just remember when in my days in the FBI, I remember we used to say, hey, look, we're the Federal Bureau of Investigation, not the Federal Bureau of Information, right? And so I think, I don't know if this is changing, but it may be where, you get large successes, but as part of those successes, you may develop new information that comes out of it, and you may or may not want to publicize that. So is that still sort of the methodology that is being used, or is there an effort to really try to demonstrate or publicize successes in a bigger way?
I think you're exactly right. We're always trying to find the balance. We want to highlight our successes to the larger audience, but we're also playing the long game here. We might not want everyone to know where we've had success, right? Because we might have larger plans in the works. And so if we were highlighting to, the general public writ large, our strategy or our plans as we take these groups offline or we conduct law enforcement action, we know that the bad guys, they read the news as well. And so we want to be careful about what we're sharing with the public, at least about successes. But on the general side of things, the FBI is really pushing hard to share indicators of compromise with the general public. You might see that information in private industry notifications that we put out, or FBI liaison messages, because on the flip side, from announcing law enforcement actions, we're really trying to push out as much intelligence as we can so that the private sector and the general public can protect themselves and protect their networks from these attacks.
No, that's really, it seems like it's a fine balance, and it seems like it still is a fine balance. So when you're coordinating an investigation like this, it seems like there's, like you said, multi-prongs going on. In the U.S., I remember for Emote, there was something like 45,000 computers that had been infected or were actively infected in the U.S. So how do you go about working with technology companies to identify those and take them down simultaneously and seize assets? Like, can you give a sense for, like, is this 10 agents? Is this 100 agents? Is this, law enforcement from, 500 people from around the globe? Can you give some perspective to folks as to, like, what kind of massive effort it is? I know what it is, but I thought it might be nice to hear from you.
It is a massive effort. Again, it depends upon, and again, I want to get away from, it's not just an FBI effort, right? Like, this is a huge effort that's undertaken by lots of different countries and lots of different organizations. And so overseas, if you're talking about the identification of a lot of victim computers, right, we're relying on certs to do those notifications. So certs that are located within each country to make contact with those victims. In the United States, it's a little bit more hodgepodge, I would say. Sometimes the FBI is doing notifications, but from the FBI perspective, we're often looking over to our counterparts in the government at CISA, right, to leverage their relationships to do many of these notifications. CISA has relationships with the ISAC, so sometimes we push things over to the ISAC so that they can leverage their relationships with some of these victims to try and make these notifications and make victims aware. But as you said, it's a huge effort, right, to push all of this information in a lot of different directions to a lot of different entities. Again, but with all of us have the same goal of making sure victims are securing and protecting their computer systems.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it seems to me like, there's always a big push to disrupt and dismantle these large criminal organizations. And it seems like it takes years to do that. And I think that's one of the pros of being in the FBI, right? Where the FBI actually encourages long, complex investigations to really disrupt and dismantle major groups. But I think that there's probably like an education component to that as well, right? I think that that's something, and I see there's an awful lot of chat about and questions about, hey, how do you establish a rapport with someone from the FBI office, like your local FBI office? Like how does somebody actually go about doing that? Do you just pick up the phone and call the local office?
So I would say if you're a medium to large size company, absolutely pick up the phone, call us. You can go to our website. We have a lot of outreach options that you'll find there to make contact with us by telephone, by email. We encourage businesses to have relationships with the FBI, with their local law enforcement action, to be proactive, so that if they're a victim of some sort of incident, they know who to call immediately. We see that often where victims might just call us proactively because they want to set up their cyber response plan. And so they want to make sure that they have a name or phone number to call to reach the FBI. And so I would say if you want to start that relationship, pick up the phone, call your local field office. We have a lot of options. We can put you in touch with our local cyber squad, and you can have contacts there. But we also have a lot of other outreach options. We have InfraGard. That's a program where the FBI maintains contacts with businesses and the local community. And if you're a victim of a cyber event, right, call us. We want to help. We want to give you information to help you secure or remediate your systems faster. We want to give you intelligence to make you again, respond to an incident more intelligently. We welcome those phone calls, and we want to be a proactive partner with the general community.
Yeah. I just saw a question come in, and it's how much overlap do you see between criminal actors and state actors? And if that does happen, is there a way that you coordinate those kind of investigations? And can you comment on that? I'm not sure if you can.
Sure, no, I can comment on it. So we are, and when we're talking about these criminal actors, we are constantly looking and evaluating to determine whether or not they have ties to any type of nation state actors, because for us that changes the calculus with things, right? If an actor is state sponsored, we have a whole set of different tools that we might use to investigate that case as to a criminal case, and to us that's a hard line in the United States, right? It's a very different scenario if we know that these types of, like any type of event, is state sponsored. So if we do recognize that, we have a whole of government approach to many of these things, and we leverage our other federal law enforcement partners as well as other government agency partners. Particularly on national security investigations, we're regularly talking to our counterparts at CIA or NSA or Treasury, and a lot of that gets deconflicted in the FBI and worked in the FBI under the National Cyber Investigative Joint Task Force. And that's a national task force where every agency in the government has representation, and we deconflict these cases and we align all of our efforts across many of these actors. And so that's how we at least handle it on the government side. But yes, like if we are constantly trying to identify if there's anything state sponsored, because that is a hard line for us on how we will handle the investigation.
The good old NCI JTF, huh? That's
absolutely.
Okay. Well, Jonathan, we only have about 4 minutes left, and I did want to touch on just one more piece since we've been sort of talking about ransomware. Can you make any comments on the FBI's position on OFAC and the OFAC sanctions or the OFAC guidance that was provided last year? Does the FBI have a position on that in any formal way?
So yeah, if you're referring, so OFAC put out some guidance last year that in short said, to be careful. I'll just put it that way: to be careful when making any of these ransomware payments, because you could fall foul of sanctions. If you are a victim of ransomware and you're deciding whether or not to make a payment, that is not the FBI's call as to whether or not you will be in violation of the sanctions or not. So we recommend that if you have any questions surrounding that you should reach out to Treasury. They're best positioned to answer those questions. In general, we have leveraged sanctions in the past, not specifically against ransomware variants, but there has been some loose ties between sanctioned entities and ransomware actors based upon some open source private industry reporting. And that has caused some consternation within the general community surrounding ransomware payments because people are worried about falling foul of sanctions. In general, it is the FBI's position that we don't want to cause more consternation in the community. We don't want anybody that's falling victim to ransomware to make their bad day even worse when they're trying to figure out whether or not they should make a payment. So when we're thinking about sanctions and how to leverage sanctions, we're thinking about doing it in such a way as to not preclude people from making payments, because we don't want to cause more consternation. And a good example of this is the SamSam ransomware investigation. When that case, when we announced indictments in that case, we also announced sanctions at the same time. And during that time, we made a hard decision to say, we're not going to sanction the actors behind SamSam because that could create confusion within the community. But what we will do is sanction the exchanges used by the ransomware actors. And that was a way that we could ensure that we weren't causing more consternation amongst victims, but still leverage sanctions in a smart way. So that's generally our strategy.
Yeah, I think it can be confusing for people or for victims who have to make a choice, right? Do I make a payment and get my business back, or do I run afoul or risk taking a chance and running afoul of being in violation of some U.S. sanction? It's a pretty challenging component. So I know we're at the end of our time, and I know it's only 25 minutes, so it's very hard to really dive in deep. There are a lot of questions that were being asked, and we will try to get to all of those questions. And I'll probably reach out and respond to each of you with respect to questions we didn't get to. So, but I do want to say, Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you so much for what you're doing to keep us safe and everyone else at the FBI and the whole law enforcement community as a whole. We really appreciate what you do, and I'm grateful that you took some time today to be with us.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. And Jason, it's always wonderful to see you again. I'll say when I started in the FBI, being my first boss, I was a little afraid of you. I'm probably still a little afraid of you now that I see you now. And I'll just imagine a sea of laughter out there. Joke.
All right. Well, thanks again. And Bruce, I think we'll turn it over to you, okay?
Thanks, Jason. And Jonathan, thanks so much for sharing the FBI perspective with us. It's just really valuable and such a great addition to this event. So thanks. And Jason, great job with the moderation. We do need more than 25 minutes on these because they're just so helpful. Our next session will be at 11 o'clock Eastern time on healthcare. So we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you.